Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome again to another extended reality talk. Today we have Jacob, we have Kathleen, we have Luke, and we have Francisca here. Our focus today is really about empathy, and we want to dig deeper into this concept because I want to allow us to think critically as we go through. I am saying today that this group is not a hype group, that we hype technology, but we critically evaluate the technology that is present. And in doing that, we keep the discussion real. Now, it's great to be back with the group for another critical discussion. Let's get the conversation started. I want us to look at empathy, and empathy is the ability to sense others' emotions, their feelings, and to imagine what someone is going through. I want to position the question at this point in time. Do you believe that extended reality can lead people to develop empathy towards others? If so, can you cite an example?
Yes, I believe that very strongly. When we had the people here from Embodied Labs and they had those different scenarios, I ended up in when I didn't know anything about it. I was just sitting there and people came in singing happy birthday to me. And so it took me a minute to figure out what was happening. And then apparently I was an older person that maybe, I can't remember if they had dementia maybe, and I spilled my water. And you should have seen the looks I got from people. And I remember going, don't look at me like that. Like I didn't mean to do it. It just came out automatically. Just, don't look at me like that. And I just felt automatically like I was that person and could feel. And then I think they also brought that person to the doctor. And the doctor talked to me a little bit. And then he talked to like, it was my son or something. And I felt really left out of the conversation. Like, why aren't you talking to me? You're talking about me. I'm sitting right here. So yes, I do believe that you can gain empathy for other people's conditions.
Good, good. Anyone else has a thought on that?
Well, I had an example that I encountered recently. It's not a VR experience. It's a 2D, or it's a 3D game, but it's on a 2D screen. And it was one of the DLCs or downloadable contents, expansions, whatever you want to call it, for Arma 3, which is a military simulator made by Bohemia Interactive and is used by the U.S. military and other branches. But this DLC was called Laws of War, and you take the role of a humanitarian aid worker that is exploding unexploded ordnance and mines. So they're clearing out minefields and things like that, cleaning up after war. And so you take on their role, and yeah, sure, you're doing your job, but then you're also doing an interview with a reporter over the phone while you're working. And so it gives you a chance to have flashbacks to the other participants in this war and what the reasonings were behind putting these mines where they were, or the reasons behind dropping these cluster bombs that ended up with unexploded ordnance, and things like that. So it posed some really critical questions at the end. So I thought that was a really a really strong experience that generated some empathy for all the sides in a conflict like that.
Yes, yes, yes. I remember watching Amazing Grace. It was a storyline regarding Ebola in Africa, and I was standing in the midst of the victims of this deadly disease, and I was saying to myself, wow, I had a first-hand experience regarding the emergency room and so forth, and I really felt some level of emotions. Anyone else want to share an experience that they've viewed in VR or extended reality?
So I think, yeah, just kind of building off some of those examples as well. I think anytime that, and I'm not going to be too specific here, I'll stay fairly broad. Anytime that you go into a situation where there's difficult answers to try to figure out, something like aid in a war zone, a hospital situation, Ebola situation, I think it's going to elicit empathy big time for whoever's in that experience. As I think it was Francisca that brought it up in our last episode, that virtual reality and extended reality, when you're in them, in the experience, that experience isn't virtual sometimes to your mind anymore. It's actually the real experience. And so I think when you put people in that situation and they have to think about these tough decisions that are made, I think it's going to elicit that empathetic response, at least to some degree.
Spot on, spot on. Francisco, I know you're coming on with something at this point in time. Let's hear from you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Actually, I can think of three specific ones that I've been privy to or had the pleasure or the privilege, excuse me, to immerse myself in them. The one that I immediately connected with was with Kathleen's that Embodied Labs example. I remember the one with Alfred, the patient with macular degeneration, where, it took me, it connected with me because I have people that I care for. And I was wondering if, my dear ones were going through that process, and how I should be a little more empathetic and more attentive to what they might need and feel, right? Should they be in that situation, or be able to at least know if that is their case, and act on that piece of data or feedback. The second one that when you posed the question about empathy, took me back to 2006, when Second Life was, it still is, big, but Professor Yellowies from UC Davis created a simulation in which you would enter the simulator, and you would go through what a patient with schizophrenia would go through. You would hear the voices, you will see things moving around that should not be moving around, or that you should not be hearing about. And it was one of the most frightening experiences that I got to really realize, what people with schizophrenia goes through. So yes, it is possible. There's an element of cognition right there, I'm sure, and an element of feelings, the heart and the soul, that makes me wonder, what is it that it kind of made me, get in that plane of understanding better, and therefore, do what's right for somebody. The last one is actually closer to home, the Teach Live. I don't know if you guys got to experiment with that one, but teaching or being a teacher's assistant for 8th graders, I think it was my scenario, and it was like 6 of them, and having to manage the students, and look will resonate with that with me, I believe. It was frightening. I was exhausted by the end of the simulation with all the scenarios, and really truly have an appreciation for teachers in the classroom in elementary school.
Yes. I want to bring a little context in, because I think there are 3 levels of empathy. Cognitive empathy, where you go in and you understand the person's perspective, so you plan accordingly. Emotional empathy, where you are connected, you feel emotions to that extent. And compassion empathy, where you practically go about making change because of that encounter. So as we go through, we might want to consider some of these, which brings me to another point, and I go over to Jacob. You can add what you want to add and respond to this question. As it relates to these forms of empathy, what discipline do you see would be better to maybe move on with these movements? You talk about the first, you give an example. What do you think empathy is discipline specific?
Yeah, I don't think that it's discipline specific, but I do feel like there are some disciplines that you could have some easier benefit from. It would be easier to set up scenarios to generate empathy. Immediately, like social work, medical, humanitarian aid, all the things that Luke kind of summarized. Those are all kind of your low hanging fruit, I guess, as far as making those scenarios. But I was thinking even as far as, customer service, like, maybe it's not as hard hitting as those other topics, but it can be easy to forget, especially when you're doing technical support or other kinds of customer service. It can be easy to forget just how frustrating it is for the customer itself, because you deal with the same problems every day, and this is their first time dealing with it. So yeah, I think there are other fields that could benefit from it, but maybe are a little harder to imagine how you would do it.
Thanks. Good point. Anyone else want to jump in and just add something to that?
I think it's about evaluating what it is you want your students to feel. And if there's something within whatever profession they're going into or whatever they're doing that eliciting that empathetic response is going to be valuable. So I think any field where there's some sort of experience that it becomes an actual affordance to immerse yourself in a virtual environment before you actually have it happen. So interestingly enough, when Francisca mentioned Teach Live, I haven't been involved with it for several years, but I had a class where we had a Teach Live experience, and it was, a tough classroom with very different learners in it, very different levels of academic performance, things like that. It was just a very classroom among, I think it was 8 students we had in there. And to see some of my students get up there and try to just interact and keep that class managed for 5 minutes, it definitely elicited that empathetic response, but it was valuable to get them in there, then be able to talk with them afterwards about, okay, what went right, what went wrong? Let's work through some strategies for how to make this better in a safe environment. So I think it can work with any field. It's just about stepping back and evaluating exactly what you want, and then evaluating the technology and experience for what it does.
Good. Any additional thoughts regarding
Yeah.
that?
Sure. Kind of piggyback on Luke right there. It's like exactly. We need to know it's not just a tool for the sake of a tool should not be used for the heck of it. You need to know why do you want to use that and why is that important? Because especially if you're talking about empathy, I mean, you're dealing with people's emotions, well-being, and Rohan, you had mentioned this, what are the ethical ramifications of
Yep. Mm-hmm.
this tool? There's a potential for a great deal of impact that you might not want to deal with or are capable to deal with. And so,
Solid.
Mhm.
Any additional? Because I have a big one coming.
I just have a really quick point. So far, we've been mostly talking about how you want to give people the experience of maybe somebody else or trying to do something. But there's also the other side of taking, like when I was in a simulation class, I had to devise a plan for a simulation. And mine was, how would a student with autism go to McDonald's and order something? Like, maybe how to train them to deal with different situations. I never got to create it, unfortunately, so I couldn't see, but there's that other side, where you have other people and try to train them with something to deal with the situation.
Yeah, I like that, Kathleen. I like that because it's like we make the assumption from a deficit model, right? But we maybe want to flip that around a bit to ensure that we have greater inclusiveness as it relates to planning. I looked at a few things and had a few thoughts before engaging. And one of the things that I've struggled with over the years as it relates to VR is the issue of the experience. And when you talk about the experience, I'm talking about the experience that will elicit emotions. I hear individuals and faculty members right across the globe talking about gamification. Go and create this game as it relates to the artifact that we're creating. But I call it an encounter. And why do I call it an encounter? Because I think it's an encounter that should change. We talked about the 3 elements of empathy. For example, if there's an issue of history and you're teaching a certain passage in history that requires emotions and that sort of compassion, we do not want to gamify it. So I call that an encounter. What are the potential drawbacks for designing and developing and implementing extended reality that will elicit empathy within the ethical framework and ensuring that it's not gamified?
In previous discussions, what I've talked about is what you're doing when you talk about an immersive experience that elicits an emotion is you're saying, okay, within the 3 domains of learning, in academics, we tend to stick a lot with the cognitive domain, all in here. What we're doing is we're moving what we've learned in the cognitive domain and taking it into the affective domain, where it's going to elicit that response from the student of empathy, feelings, all of that stuff is in the affective domain. So we're taking our learning from cognitive to affective. Anytime you do that, there's potential drawbacks. And the main one I think of is when you put somebody in a situation where it puts them in that affective domain and elicits that response, the potential drawback is you put them in a situation that may take them back to a time in their head where something actually happened to them way back when, even something minor, that puts them in a space where what you're asking them to do is more than they can emotionally handle. And so I think that is one of the biggest potential drawbacks is you've really got to know your students and decide if the affordance is worth putting somebody in that situation for, and if you're prepared if a response like that happens.
Good, good. I love that. Excellent response. Anyone else would want to add on?
I just want to make a quick point because I'm working on a paper, as some of you know, with College of Nursing, and I was looking at different scenarios, and I saw one where there was a child, a young girl in a wheelchair. They did some AR with her where she was walking, and I didn't finish the article, but I thought, well, boy, what if she really loved the walking part, and then when you took the AR away, did she get sad? Did she cry? Was she happy? What did that cause her?
Yes, solid point. Solid point. Francisco.
Yeah, I wonder, as I was listening to Luke and at Kathleen, like as instructional designers, or as educators, as we help design these experiences, right? Is there a need for another role to help us evaluate or assess the readiness of a particular student whom we are having to or wanting to go through the experience? Is the learner really ready to take on this empathic experience? I wonder what other roles are there that we need to be tapping on to. Like how can we assess whether to use that strategy, and how and for whom at what particular time? It's like all the W's basically. And I think it's not going to be a simple way to come up with a solution, or that the current state of affairs, the staffing and the venues that we currently have in higher education or schools is prepared to handle. And I wonder what we can do to be able to do it right.
Yes. Before I give my thought, Jacob, you have any input on this?
Nothing that hasn't already been said.
Yes, those are big things, Francisca, and I don't think the framework is there yet. You might not agree with me, but I think we're still playing the beauty of the tool. And that's a sort of game that we're looking at, what this tool can do and what it can create, but the pedagogical side has not been thought about. And I think that is going to impact, because we need a framework. And this question is kind of directed at Luke, because I know he has given some thought to it. And Francisca, you touched on it earlier. But in your thought about virtual reality, Luke, extended reality, you go through a process where you think about the technology and what needs to take place in the engagement and so forth. You talk about the aspect of giving a description before to the aspect of debriefing the individual, if they are to use that. Could you give a highlight regarding your thoughts that we've had over the past couple of years?
Yes, so I think first off, just really going back to something I said before, just evaluate at even a basic level, is the affordance of what you're asking people to go through worth the emotional response you might get? I think that's a key foundational question. But with any experience where you're asking students to feel, or even some where you're not, it's just something you should do in teaching, to have that briefing where you say, here's what you're about to encounter. Here's what's going to go on. Here is, brief that situation. Allow the students to opt out who might need to opt out. It's totally okay to have a student opt out and still figure out ways to make them part of the overall experience. Then after that briefing, that's when you can go into the experience. And then it's critical to have that debrief after the experience, making sure everybody's in a good place, making sure that they learn what you needed them to learn. Pedagogically speaking, in both the brief and the debrief, you can also provide guiding questions for students to think about while they're in the experience, and talk to them about the rules and guidelines of how you want them to move about the experience. So there's a management piece, pedagogical piece, just an overall caring about your student piece. And similarly in the debrief, make sure that the students ended up where you needed them to be. And if the students are right there with you, and they're within this virtual reality experience and they're physically with you, it's okay to ask questions throughout it, and make sure that students know also that they've got that ability to come to you and ask questions, turn off the experience, get out of it if they need to. And so the brief and the debrief are critical to that experience going well, because you're talking about management, you're talking about pedagogy, and again, caring about your students and their well-being as they go through it.
Yes, good. Any other add-on to that, please?
I noticed back when we were first testing things out, we had different people come in and try it. I can't remember if it was the whale or a different one. And without mentioning any names, somebody got like car sick and had to sit down and was nauseous. And I'm like, wow, that didn't happen to me. But I remember volunteering to do, there was a simulation for driving a car. And I had to run out of the room because I thought I was going to barf. Luckily I didn't.
I think I did that one over the School of Engineering too.
Right? Yeah.
I
Did it make you sick?
I did not complete it. I had to leave.
I actually did, but barely.
Yes, wonderful.
Yeah,
wonderful discussion. I want to think about the issue too of ethical implications, because I think that is one of the greatest things for me. You don't want to have to go through a process that someone is going to be traumatized by the experience and have to go through the sort of counseling necessary. So we have to consider these ethical issues too. How do you see faculty using VR extended reality for empathy? Do you have any cautionary information that you'd like to share as we wrap up this session?
Well, I think this was said a couple times, but just make sure that it's worth it. Like, you're going to have to spend a lot of time building this scenario. Is it able to achieve the goal of your lesson better than other means? And then just to repeat what Luke said, is the emotional cost worth it?
Good point.
I would add plan. Jacob said you're going to take a lot of time building this experience, and so plan appropriately. Plan everything from all angles. Understand the brief, the debrief, what's going to happen in the experience, what you need to do, what students might need to know prior to going in, what they're going to need to know afterwards. So plan the whole thing up front so that you're ready to go.
Excellent. Francisca, Kathleen, before we wrap up.
Yeah, not just a comment to Luke's. You have to have plan A, B, C, all the way down to, and a different one for each student too. So not quick. It's a tool that can be highly effective, but you need to know when and how to use it for whom.
Kathleen, the last word.
Not sure how to do this, but maybe it's time to get more people involved, maybe from cognitive sciences, medicine, education, and talk about what should we be asking. Maybe there's a pre-test. What should be asked if you get car sick really easy? Maybe there are things, I don't know, that seems big, but something to think about, because the people that do the Teach Live, they've been doing that for years. Maybe they have some ideas now of what to check with. Although it's funny because that you're kind of watching the scenario. You're not really physically in it, right?
Thank you so much, Kathleen. That brings another point that we'll see for another discussion. What is required to plan such an event? Because you have to have programmers, individuals who are content specialists. Maybe you have to pull from the field of psychology that brings together the issue of learning sciences. It's a wonderful conversation we had today talking about empathy and the need to develop that across higher education. I think we have touched on many issues. The need for us to be thoughtful as it relates to the encounter. It's not a game. It pulls on the compassion, the emotion, and also should lead to a change in behavior towards what has taken place in that engagement. It should not just be seen as a tool that will allow someone to gamify an experience, but to put forward an event that will be life-changing. Colleagues, another interesting conversation on virtual reality, extended reality. It's my pleasure again to work with you, and I hope that we will do another engaging conversation in the next month or so. Thanks again, and individuals watching this recording, please remember to share, because we have to share the information so others are aware of what is required when planning an event that requires you pulling on people's empathy. Thanks.